Greetings and welcome to this edition of the Pastor's Study. Remember that these messages, these sermons are being brought to you by the Church of God Seventh Day with headquarters in Salem, West Virginia. If you would like any additional information, please contact us and we'd be glad to respond to you. Even if you were requesting a ministerial visit, please let us know. I usually like to start out with a little bit of a story, and today's no different. We had a family who was really trying to teach their children to help. And, they would ask them to help with different chores. And so this particular evening, after they finished up supper and everyone cleaned up, their youngest one came into the living room and asked, the mother and father, and said, would you like some coffee? And they said, oh, that sounds wonderful. So he turned around and he said, do you want capitated or decapitated? Depends on how you like your coffee. Well, as of right now, we have been touring the book of Daniel. The first message we brought was how Daniel got to where he, was a member of Nebuchadnezzar's court. And of course, we went into the famous dream that Nebuchadnezzar had, and Daniel interpreted it, and we talked about the various kingdoms, and then that brought us to the end of Daniel chapter 2. And I just want to review just slightly with regard to what Nebuchadnezzar said after David had given him the interpretation, and of course recognize the fact that God had given him the information, that God is the one that reveals these things, and that, Daniel was really just a messenger. So if we would review in Daniel 2, we're going to go to 46. Says, then King Nebuchadnezzar fell upon his face and worshipped Daniel, and commanded that they should offer an oblation and sweet odors unto him, right? The king answered unto Daniel and said, of a truth it is that your God is the God of gods, and a Lord of kings, and a revealer of secrets, seeing thou couldst reveal this secret. Then the king made Daniel a great man and gave him many great gifts, and made him ruler over the whole province of Babylon, and chief of the governors over all the wise men of Babylon. Then Daniel requested of the king, and he said, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego over the affairs of the province of Babylon. But Daniel sat in the gate of the king. So he was closer to the king, like an advisor, I guess, in a sense. So, but what I wanted to do is emphasize how Nebuchadnezzar responded after he reveals, the contents of Nebuchadnezzar's dream. And, he says, oh, Daniel's God is God. And he goes on to say all those particular things. And then we start out in chapter 3. In chapter 3, Nebuchadnezzar, this is 3:1, Nebuchadnezzar the king made an image of gold whose height was 60 cubits, and the breadth thereof 6 cubits. He set it up in the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. Then Nebuchadnezzar the king sent together the princes, the governors and captains, the judges, the treasurers and counselors, the sheriffs, and all the rulers of the provinces to come to the dedication of the image which Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up. So then he basically says, this thing is huge. If it's about 3 score, that would be 60 cubits, and then 60 cubits would be about 75 feet. And I'm not positive, but I believe a floor, in a building, if you go up, is about every 10 feet. So this particular image would be about 7.5 stories high, and it would be 6 cubits, so it would be about 9 feet wide. Now that's approximate. So 9 feet wide, 75 feet tall, and it sounds like, it's made of gold. Now, solid gold, I mean, if this is made of solid gold, this thing is uh, probably the most valuable thing on the face of the earth at that particular time. I mean, this is unbelievable. I can't even imagine how many ounces of gold would go into something like this. But nonetheless, he sets this thing up, and then he goes on to say he writes this. I guess he has a decree in a sense, right? Um, said verse 4, it says, then in herald cried aloud to you, it is commanded, O people, nations, languages, that at what time ye hear the sound of the cornet, flute, harp, sackbut, psaltery, dulcimer, and all kinds of music. So what they were supposed to do is they were supposed to fall down and worship the golden image that Nebuchadnezzar, the king, hath set up, you know. And then, of course, there's, this admonition, which basically says, and whoso falleth not down and worship shall be the same hour be cast in the midst of a burning fiery furnace. Therefore, at that time, when all the people heard the sound of the cornet, flute, harp, sackbut, psaltery, and all kinds of music, all the people, the nations and the languages fell down and worshiped the golden image that Nebuchadnezzar, the king, had set up. So, so this is truly idol worship. So, instead of really paying attention more to Daniel, he's like, he just goes crazy with himself and builds this image and then insists that everybody needs to worship this image. And of course, this is how we get into that wonderful story about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, because they turned around and they said, well, no, we're not going to do this. And I assume Daniel also, he just might not have been in this particular area at this time, and it wasn't he that they were complaining about, right? Because it goes in verse 8, wherefore at that time certain Chaldeans came near and accused the Jews, right? They spake and said to the king Nebuchadnezzar, O king, live forever, right? And then, of course, you made this decree. You said that as soon as people heard the music, they were supposed to fall down and worship the image. And, these three guys over here, they didn't do that. So, of course, the king Nebuchadnezzar gets all upset. He's made this decree. People are supposed to do this. And these three young men are not doing it. So, of course, they turn around and he's got to carry out his, his sentence in a sense. If you don't do this, this is what's going to happen to you. And he's so angry, he says that he wants to make this thing 7 times hotter, right? So in 19 it says, then was Nebuchadnezzar full of fury, and the form of his visage was changed against Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Therefore he spake and commanded that they should heat the furnace 7 times more than it was wont to be heated. And I had asked somebody about this one time, and the only way they can do it, as far as I know, was they have to add more oxygen, and that's why you see a blacksmith having a bellows that he can pump more air into his fire while he's trying to work some metal and do certain things. And so I imagine there was some kind of a setup here where they had. Now, let's face it, if you're talking about a fiery furnace and it's going to accommodate human beings, that it has got to be at least on a fairly large size. Most blacksmiths would be using a smaller furnace of sorts, and I don't know if there's a necessary specific size that it should be, but it sounds like this fiery furnace, of course, was pretty large. And so it would have had a large bellows. I mean, we might have had, men, normally like a blacksmith or somebody that would work with a furnace of this type, somebody who would craft in metal. Watch a program where a guy makes knives. So, and he can adjust and he works it so that he's getting the metal to the proper temperature so that he can work with it and do what it is that he needs to do to, form it into the implement that he wants. So I imagine this is so big. We've got men working this thing, so they're working it up and down. I don't know how big it would have to be, but to make it hotter, they have to add more, add more oxygen. Now, if there are other things, I'm just not aware of it. But so he commands that this thing be hot, hot, hot. And of course, what happens, he says in 20, he says, and he commanded the most mighty men that were in his army to bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and cast them into burning furnace. Then these men were bound in their coats, their hosen, their hats, and other garments, and were cast into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. Therefore, because the king's commandment was urgent and the fire exceeding hot, the flame of the fire slew those men that took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So it was so hot that, when they go to throw them in the fiery furnace, they are consumed, or at least, maybe because the oxygen is taken away from that particular area, they can't breathe, and they're instantly, they instantly die. And so this thing is very, very dangerous. So we know that this is not a trick. These people really died taking them and putting them in this furnace. And of course, we learn what happens. Nothing happens to them. In fact, it's such a miracle um, that when they come out, when Nebuchadnezzar looks in and sees them, calls them out, and they come out. In 27, it says, and the princes, governors, captains, and the king's counselors, being gathered together, saw these men upon whose bodies the fire had no power, nor was an hair of their head singed, neither were their coats changed, nor the smell of fire had passed on them. I mean, that, you want to talk about a miracle. It's a miracle from start to finish. And even to the point where people wouldn't even know that they were in a fire. They don't smell like a fire. Their hair is not singed. Their clothes are not touched by this fire or this heat. So God has worked this miracle. It's almost like he put them in an ice cube, and nothing harmed them. And of course, we know it would be his power that protects them. But they are protected right down to the hairs of their head. And of course, he turns around and he says, then Nebuchadnezzar spake and said, blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Sound familiar? I mean, this is this is what he does. Daniel interprets, wow, the God of Daniel be praised, and he's the God of gods. He's the one. And now we turn around and it's like we got the same thing here with these three young men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, right? Who hath sent his angel. This is the middle of 28, right? And delivered his servants that trusted in him, and have changed the king's word and yielded their bodies, that they might not serve nor worship any god except their own God, which is a wonderful witness. I mean, you could not ask for any more witness. And so they witnessed, and God witnesses, and so we have this overall miracle that takes place. And Nebuchadnezzar's up to his old tricks, right? These praise their God. He's the God of gods in a sense, but it's like he's not doing anything about it, right? So 29, therefore I make a decree that every people, nation, and language which speak anything amiss against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be cut in pieces, and their houses shall be made a dunghill, because there is no other God that can deliver after this sort. And that's absolutely true, but, he's just so full of himself, right? And then, of course, in 30, it says, then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon, right? So then we have another situation in chapter 4 where Nebuchadnezzar has another dream. Now, this is a different type of dream. And he lies upon his bed, and he dreams. And maybe it's a vision, actually. But says in 4, I, Nebuchadnezzar, was at rest in mine house and flourishing in my palace. I saw a dream which made me afraid, and the thoughts upon my bed and the visions of my head troubled me. Therefore made I a decree to bring in all the wise men. So he starts all over again. He almost goes through the same thing that he did with the original dream of the image with the head of gold and silver and brass and iron. So he brings them in, but of course Daniel turns around and he's the one that's going to interpret this thing for him. And Daniel, uh, gives him the interpretation. I'm just going to read a little bit of it. It says in 10, thus were the visions of mine head in my bed. I saw and beheld a tree in the midst of the earth, and the height thereof was great. The tree grew and was strong, and the height thereof reached unto heaven, and the sight thereof to the end of all the earth. The leaves thereon were fair, and the fruit thereof much, and in it was meat for all. The beasts of the field had shadow under it, and the fowls of heaven dwelt in the boughs thereof. So this is a wonderful image, a huge tree. It's almost like everything is being fed and protected by this huge tree, right? So then later on it said, 13, I saw in the vision of my head upon my bed, and behold, a watcher, and a holy one came down from heaven. He cried aloud and said, thus, hew down the tree and cut off his branches, shake off his leaves, scatter his fruit. So, of course, in 16, we get an indication of what may happen. We don't really know. If you've never read this story before and you don't know what's going to happen, this is, like an amazing story that takes place at this dream. Daniel interprets it. It gets to the point where when Daniel understands, when God has given him the interpretation, it's like he doesn't want to tell the king. And the king has to turn around and prompt him and say, well, if it's bad news, it's bad news. Just tell me what it is. And, don't be afraid to tell me. So, Daniel, of course, does. Now in 16, it says, let his heart be changed from a man's, and let a beast's heart be given unto him. Let 7 times pass over him. 19, this is what I was just talking about. Then Daniel, whose name was Belteshazzar, this is the name that, he was given by the Babylonian king, Belshazzar, was astonished for 1 hour, and his thoughts troubled him. The king spake and said, Belshazzar, let not the dream or the interpretation thereof trouble thee. Belshazzar answered and said, my lord, the dream be to them that hate thee, and the interpretation thereof to thine enemies. And then he goes on to say what's going to happen. It says, the tree that thou sawest, which grew and was strong, whose height reached unto heaven, the sight thereof of all the earth, whose leaves were fair, and the fruit thereof much. And it was meat for all, under which the beasts of the field dwelt, and upon whose branches the fowls of heaven had their habitation. It is thou, O king. So here we have another situation where he's dreaming. The first one, the one with the head of gold and the shoulders and arms of silver, was talking about world civilizations. Now, this particular dream is specific to Nebuchadnezzar. And so Daniel is explaining to him what happened and what's going to happen. And it says, 23, and whereas the king saw a watcher and a holy one coming down from heaven and saying, hew the tree down and destroy it, yet leave the stump of the roots thereof in the earth, even with a band of iron and brass, in the tender grass of the field. Let it be wet with the dew of heaven, and let this portion be with the beasts of the field till 7 times pass. This is the interpretation, O king, and this is the decree. 25, that they shall drive thee from men, and thy dwelling shall be with the beasts of the field, and they shall make thee to eat grass as oxen, and they shall wet thee with the dew of heaven. 7 times shall pass over thee, now that's 7 years, till thou know that the Most High ruleth in the kingdom of men, and giveth it to whomsoever he will. A lot of people don't understand that. We have the people that we have in charge, even in our country. These people are in charge because God has allowed them to be in charge. Whether you like President Trump or you don't like President Trump, you have to take into consideration that God is the one who placed him there. And it's just like Nebuchadnezzar. God placed him there. He enjoyed what he enjoyed because God allowed him to. Daniel is reminding Nebuchadnezzar of this fact. And he says to him in 26, and whereas thy commanded to leave the stump of the tree roots, thy kingdom shall be sure unto thee after that thou shalt have known that the heavens do rule. Wherefore, O king, so he's saying to him that even though this is going to happen to you, there will be a kingdom left to you after you come out of this situation that you're going to find yourself in. And that is, he's going to be reduced to an animal. And after 7 years, he is going to get his reasoning back. But before that, Daniel gives him a warning. It says in 27, wherefore, O king, let my counsel be acceptable unto thee, and break off thy sins by righteousness, and thine iniquities by showing mercy to the poor, if it may be a lengthening of thy tranquility. So he says to him, he says, here's an out for you. You can do something. You can do a little something about this. But in 28, all this came upon the king Nebuchadnezzar. At the end of 12 months, he walked in the palace of the kingdom of Babylon. The king spake and said, is not this great Babylon that I have built for the house of the kingdom by the might of my power and for the honor of my majesty? So right away he wasn't paying attention to what Daniel was telling him, and it's like, see what I've done, see what I've accomplished. I'm a great guy. I'm wonderful. I'm marvelous. Look at this. Look at me. So as soon as he says it, 31, while the word was in the king's mouth, there fell a voice from heaven saying, O King Nebuchadnezzar, to thee it is spoken. The kingdom is departed from thee. And of course, in 32, they shall drive thee from men, and thy dwelling shall be with the beasts of the field. 33, the same hour was this thing fulfilled upon Nebuchadnezzar, and he was driven from men and did eat grass as oxen, and his body was wet with dew of heaven, till his hairs were grown like eagle's feathers, and his nails like birds' claws. And at the end of days, this would be after 7 years, so he's out there crawling around, and he's like an animal. I can't imagine what the people were saying. It's almost like that guy, he's got to be nuts. He's crazy. But the kingdom stayed intact until this was finished. So 34, at the end of days, I, Nebuchadnezzar, lift up mine eyes unto heaven, and my understanding returned unto me. And I blessed the Most High. This guy's got practice doing this, right? And I blessed the Most High. I praised and honored him that liveth forever, whose dominion is an everlasting dominion, and his kingdom is from generation to generation. And all the inhabitants of the earth are reputed as nothing, and he doeth according to his will in the army of heaven and among the inhabitants of the earth, and none can stay his hand or say unto him, What doest thou? At the same time my reason returned unto me, and for the glory of my kingdom mine hour and brightness returned unto me, and my counselors and my laws sought unto me. Excuse me. And I was established in my kingdom, and excellent majesty was added unto me. Now I, Nebuchadnezzar, praise and extol and honor the King of heaven, all whose works are truth, and his ways judgment, and those that walk in pride he is able to abase. So it is a lesson that he did learn. That's where we end up leaving Nebuchadnezzar. We do not find him after this. Um, we're going to end here today. Next time we're going to get into Belshazzar and the handwriting on the wall. And Belshazzar, as far as I know, was either writers say he was either a son or a grandson. They're not really sure of Nebuchadnezzar, but nonetheless, he's a descendant of Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar disappears from the pages of the Bible at this particular time, and we are going to find out. We're going to read about another miracle that takes place during this wonderful book. Until next time, this is Pastor Bud Randall saying goodbye, friends.